I'm still not relying on a continual division between people who have just started to be exposed to this, either here or by tape or with the older people. But some of the things that continue to arise, it is profitable for me to respond to. And one is notes I get from people that, at least speaking time-wise, have been exposed to this only for a bit, continue to seem to be somewhat confused by some of the little things I bring up. And they try and treat them like, in a sense, as though I were in charge of conjuring up an endless stream of weird observations, or to describe something in a way that perhaps nobody's ever described it, and then I leave it, oftentimes, with my reference to it being a rhetorical muralization for you, but they seem to take it on the basis that I in some way just turned around and thought, boy, isn't that weird, and I brought it up like a joke. Or I brought it up perhaps as some kind of self-promotion, as in the vein of, boy, am I not clever. The basis of it is to cause you. And if we were back 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, as some of you should know by now from hearing the older tapes, I was filling in all the blanks in a sense, or me saying now, oftentimes I'm trying not to rub your nose right up against the window pane. If it does not become some kind of continuing dialogue, not a monologue, then indeed this is a church, and I didn't know it. And indeed I am a rabbi and didn't know it. It is to cause you. And it comes to mind because there may be at least one tonight that will strike many of you on the surface. I was not intending to rub it completely in, but it may strike some of you in that vein of, boy, is that not weird? Or I bet nobody in the world could have come up with that. And then perhaps chuckle or think, what an entertaining fella, period. And you've blown it. Now on to related matters. That which I was speaking of last week, of the pyramid of pity, which may have been an ill-chosen description, but what the hell. Of what I was describing to you in the sense that ordinary people, the way in which they are wired up, where would seem to be the center of their orientation, where would seem to be the center of their particular factory in which they take in energy, they transform energy, and they pass it back out. That based upon that, if indeed we could divide all of humanity into 3 main types, and say here's a red circuit man, here's a blue circuit person, and here's a yellow circuit woman, and if indeed it was constructed in a 2-dimensional hierarchy such as I drew, or a variation thereof, as I pointed out, that someone who would seem to be naturally wired up, that their center of energy transformation was in one of those places, let us say the blue, then that person, under all ordinary conditions, could never have any sympathy. In the broadest sense of the word, I said care for, but I'll admit to you it's what ordinary people would ordinarily call sympathy. But I was trying to extend the way in which you attempted to look at it. It can only be at a level lower than yours. The closest thing to even the similar level, if it is blood kin. And the red circuit person, as I pointed out, they are almost, the closer you get to the archetype, if there were such, that they have almost no sympathy, that they almost care for no one except blood kin. All right, if some of you did not put this together, and by God, some of you better. Somebody fake it. As soon as I say it, several people nod like they would in the Baptist church, like I knew that. I gave you a week. You should see that if you find it profitable, and almost everyone could use it still to some degree, you can get a general sense of where and how you were originally wired up by just examining where you seem to have always had a kind of mechanical concern. What groups of people, if any, what types of situations that people seem to get themselves into are the kinds of things that will strike you on the front page of the National Enquirer as you stand in line, since I know you wouldn't buy it, but you would just glance around and see. Is it something terrible that happened? Did the R&D department at MIT burn down? Not that, I guess that'd make the pages of National Enquirer. Did that happen? Did someone now successfully in court claim that they wrote all of the Lennon-McCarthy songs? Did you find out that Jack Youngblood is retiring from football and has bone cancer? What groups of people, what kinds of situations is it that you seem to have been naturally wired up to feel a natural kind of sympathy for, of oh? Because almost all of you still want to ask questions along such lines as, what kind of person am I? Am I a certain type? If I could just really put my finger on what I am, I'm just sure that it would open up all kinds of new horizons to me. And then, of course, many people for a long time think that I'm playing dirty because I must know and I won't tell you. But if you want some sense of it, is what groups of people, just back to your own natural voices, what kinds of people have you seemed to have always had just an immediate sympathy for, if any? And then what kinds, using the kinds of examples I drew last week, of so-called hardships you can hear of some group of people, and you hear of it, and to you it's almost a joke. If they call that hardship, that's not hardship, or even if it is, it's such a small group, who cares? What difference does it make? And then, of course, I can point out to you that wherever a person is born, the locale of where you're wired up, and everyone was, those who are correctly, as I keep saying, drawn to this, is your home place to varying degrees, is less specific than everyone else. That if there was an archetype drawn to this, which there is not any more than there is in life, but if there was, it would be a person, and don't anyone take offense to this because none of you will meet this requirement, but it would have been a person that would have had almost equal interest as they were growing up in sports, in the arts, in intellectual pursuits, starting back in grammar school at the latest. Or conversely, if anybody can figure this out, you had no particular interest in anything. In practice, however, those kinds of people do not actually end up in anything except usually a home or a cave. But I just wanted to remind you again that everything is the same, especially when it seems to be its opposite. So if there was an archetype of this, it would be people that had almost an equal interest. But all of you must know by now that that is, to say the least, a rarity. Because if they had interest, as I've tried to encourage some of you before, interest, once you understand it, equals talent, or talent equals interest. And you must see that life does not turn out on any sort of even limited assembly line basis people who are fairly, without making some effort, on their own, who are fairly proficient, excited by physical activity, and then can go home and get almost the same kind or the same, let's say, amount of enjoyment out of painting or strumming their guitar or zither, assuming that gives pleasure, and then might turn around and to be taking night classes in astrophysics. That is not the norm. So, since there are no archetypes, just a variation of things I've said before, but let me point out, you have got to extend the place. You've got to extend your birthplace. And in a sense, everybody was born, I don't know whether that yellow shows up on the camera, but the top where I draw the brain, the top of my old nervous system symbol, it is yellow up there if it's showing up. But you in general, less than the populace if you belong here. But still, you in general were born almost in a locale that looked at a certain way. remembered a certain way down your own nervous system, all of you by now should be able to say, yes, I grew up, and if there were such general specific types as red circuit people, blue circuit people, yellow circuit people, I was definitely a blue circuit person. I was always nervous. My mother will tell you as a child I was very, very nervous. I was easily frightened. My feelings were just subject to be hurt by the least little thing, or somebody else to say, all my life I've been a rough and tumble kind of guy, even though I might be a girl. Somebody else may say, I don't know, I was never interested in sports. Well, look at me. You can just tell I'm not that kind, but I can remember at the age of 9, I was trying to read Whitehead. You have got to be able to expand where you were born. And there is one way to look at it, among others, and that is to be able to expand that which you feel for, that which you can care for, which is synonymous with that which you understand. But if you cannot expand where you were born, and the kinds of jokes that some of you newer people stumbled on for a while of me using New Jersey and Alabama as a fictitious land inside the nervous system, you would be born in an Alabama of the red circuit, or a Chicago of the blue circuit, or a New York City of the yellow circuit, and that's where you live. And anything outside the city limits of that, to say it's bucolic would be an overstatement. It's like it's irrelevant. If it is not going on here, I have no feeling for it, I have no interest for it. If all of the art museums in the world closed down, saith the man in Alabama, big deal. In fact, I have read, if I remember, that some of our tax money goes to support these things. That they pay $5 million for something that some old guy painted 600 or 700 years ago. There's a guy sitting there looking at a rose, really very intelligent, and they paid $6 million and I helped pay for it. If they go out of business, we'll all be better off. We can build a new stadium for the teams. I have very often, as you recall, pointed out a necessary lateral expansion that I have been normally drawing inside this upper level of using the two-dimensional drawing, that everyone is born, and this again just being a variation of in a certain locale, and that the only kind of proper support for this is to be able to expand that. But it is not by any means limited to the yellow circuit. As everyone knows, I have required that those actively involved with this do a number of things, such as the 45 minutes or the hour, whichever was the last one I handed out, of exercise every day. And then I have pointed out in task and then in general that people should be feeding it something that would be out of the ordinary food for you, whatever it is. I keep bringing up physics or mathematics, but something that requires some effort. In the same way that if you're getting exercise, it is not getting out continually and going down one hill that takes you 30 minutes, and all you have to do is act like one of these little plastic toys that's on a pivot with the feet that just let gravity pull you. That is not exercise. There has to be the burning of energy. It has to change the tempo and or the temperature of the entire organism, or the red circuit was not exercised. In the same way, that can be pointed out in the yellow circuit. It's not that mystical. The blue circuit becomes another matter. And I'm going to touch on some of that in ostensibly a different way come shortly. But all ideas of some kind of awakening, or as per my last description, of being able today to begin to activate a circuit that is not necessary in humanity. It cannot be some kind of one-sided so-called development. And even though I continue to refer you to the yellow circuit, and I point out that using this not completely unfair two-dimensional diagram, it's not literally true. Of course, it's not literally true what we are, but that is not literally true. But insofar as that goes, the other circuit is going on top It is still connected, the red circuit, for the time being at least, as far as I can see, is going to have to continue to operate as long as we are in this physical form, in this dimension. But it will be an extension, and as far as it coming from any particular place, it's going to be an extension of the yellow, not the red. Humanity is not about to grow another arm. It's not necessary. On the contrary, we less and less to make a living. We less and less insofar as making life grow, even need muscles. It's what robots are for. It's what this was for. The extension, to use my descriptions and to use this two-dimensional diagram, in a sense is going to grow out of the yellow circuit. But for that to happen, it cannot come about through some one-sided, such as there's no way to read yourself into developing a new circuit. There is no way to think yourself into some kind of enlightenment, because everything the yellow circuit can think, it has already thought. There is no way that you could listen to me or anyone and take notes and go, my, yes, yes, how true, how astounding. I'll wait for this all to sink in, and someday, such as being exposed to radiation, just suddenly out of the side of my head, I'll begin to grow a new kind of brain, or a new piece of the brain. It will happen. I pay attention to what he says. It is not through some kind of unusual, for you, development of the red circuit or the blue circuit that will bring this about, but there is an absolute bare minimal level that is necessary. You cannot develop a new circuit if, for instance, you and your red circuit were almost the epitome of an estranged couple. If indeed you were with some would-be group that they're everywhere and always have been, that one of their attitudes is to hell with the body. It says right here in the Torah, it says right here in the New Testament, Muhammad pointed out that the body is a drag, it is a bummer, and we would all be closer to the gods and thinking great thoughts if it wasn't for our body getting hungry, making rude noises, and getting horny. It gets in the way. I've been through this enough that everybody better have some taste of this by now. It is not necessary to be big and strong. It is not necessary to be the most athletic person in the world. But if you do not have a kind of basic relationship with the energies that are necessary to keep a red circuit functioning at a minimal level, and a minimal level is a maximal level, if there was such a word, it has got to be operating to where it is being fed and it is happy. If it's not, it will affect this. And that's one of the strange things I'll get into here at the end, that I was warning you of believing that I may be just up to conjuring up obtuse and surprising observations. You have to expand in all possible directions. If apparently, and this goes, there's some part of this true for everyone sitting in this room and those hearing this and seeing this in other times and places. You were born primarily either in the red, the blue, or the yellow circuit. All of you were. Now, all of you, if you were able to see it, should have had like a secondary circuit going that nobody sitting here should have been as one-sided as my kind of archetypical examples. That you may have been mostly a jock, or you may have been mostly a woman sitting around drawing flowers and writing love poems to an elusive stranger with long black hair and a pencil mustache that had billions of dollars and someday would find you. You might be able to feel, in your opinion, if there were three types, I definitely was born. You may say grew up and affected, but I'm telling you, you were born. And I was that, but you're right. Now I think about it, I never was very athletic, but some of my friends really used to make fun of the jocks and the people that took football seriously. I didn't go out for football, but I never did ridicule it. In a sense, I always wanted to. I don't know why I didn't, I just didn't. You should have had at least a good secondary circuit in operation. Now, to do this properly, the proper foundation, you've got to. It's not me requesting it, or it will finally stop you. There has got to be a kind of equilibrium. It's got to be that you have, from wherever you were born in that system, that you have expanded it in all possible directions. Two-dimensionally, as per that, the easy example to give, if apparently you were born, you looking back, I surely was blue circuit. That's me all over. You have got to expand it now in all directions, not just in the yellow, which is the way humanity is going, insofar as a two-dimensional description, but you've also got to run it back this way. In a sense, you have got to go back and pick up what you missed. Does that yellow show up at all on the camera, or can you tell? Well, that was yellow. Those of you looking. All right. Something that is very sticky that I hit on periodically, but you're going to have to finally see it, the less and less specific I am. It would appear that there are certain types of people in the world. There have been attempts through fairly mechanical, mystical aspects of life's body, all the way up to psychologists that have tried to some way classify types of people, that they just smell the validity of it, that there are types of people, there's some limited type, or if not limited type, there are at least types that I can look at people of diverse backgrounds, different sexes, different cultures, and by God, there is something so similar about this person and that person and this person, and now I look around and I see thousands of others that they constitute some kind of type. Now, for a simple shorthand, which I've told you does not actually exist, it's just verbiage based upon reality, that I could say that there are three basic types. Those that seem to be primarily in charge of taking in energy through the factory, through the lower, through the red circuit, transforming it, and then transmitting it. And then those that seem to be so centered blue-wise, and those that seem to be so primarily functioning here. And it seems fairly obvious. Even though I warn you every time I say it, that's not exactly true. Some of you, in your attempt to ask me a specific question, I understand, will even write me notes and say I apparently was always more of a red type, or I think I observed things about a yellow type, and sometimes I will send you back a note and respond to it in a not dissimilar fashion. And it seems obvious. And it seems as though I've even hinted and made examples to where it may have even seemed to have made it more obvious that there are certainly red circuit people. The dumb football player, the guy that in fact had a scholarship and got through the University of Oklahoma or Nebraska, and you hear him talk to interview him, and he's almost illiterate. And you just look, and you can just imagine trying to take him in to a museum and to bring him for Matisse or Rembrandt, or to make him sit down and listen to Mozart. You just know, well, it's not going to work. And it would seem likewise obvious to surely all of you by now that they can interview, or perhaps you knew someone, a teacher in college, the old proverbial guy with his tie crooked and skinny and glasses this thick and his hair all messed up, that's just a raving expert. He just knows all this crap in his field. He just knows all the crap. He's got books out, he's got credentials, and you see him, he constantly trips. He picks up the chalk and goes to mark on the blackboard. He breaks the chalk, and he'll bend over, and he'll hit his head on the desk. He's going around always sniffling. You can try and imagine dragging him out to hear James Brown. Probably try to get him to sit down. He might sit down and be able to stand back. He might take a nap and you didn't notice it. But the point is to try to get him involved that the arts mean something. There's something that the human spirit is trying to, I don't know, express. And him go, anyway, it seems to be the art types, right? It just seems to be obvious. And then surely, if any is obvious, it would have to be the blue type. The half-insane artist, musician, writer. History seems to be replete with the examples. The guys that were just nuts, that they lived for their art. They wouldn't eat. They never exercised. They didn't take care of themselves. They never read a book. They perhaps dropped out of school after 1 or 2 years, and then they wrote this masterpiece, so humanity says. Or they began to write music, and they could walk around and write whole scores in their head, and then 2 days later sit down when they had the chance and got some paper and wrote out the whole thing in 3 or 4 hours. Yet they were vulgar. They were always sick. They had no manners. Outside their music, which still gets some of you, since we got so many people like music in here, is to think that, getting away from the classical era, that musicians, people you hear records, people that might be your contemporary favorites, are in some way hip, that they wrote songs that always have a philosophical message, and then you're face to face with them, and it's, anyway, it seems to be an absolute archetypical situation, right? All right. See if you can follow this, because it affects all of you, and some of you have taken this very close to your own apparent observation of yourself, and that is, if there were types, the way I've described, the blue circuit would not actually be a type. If there were types, the way in which I've talked around it, and the way I've just said here in the last 2 or 3 minutes, and drew back these kind of outlines, what would seem to be the blue circuit centered is not actually a type. It is a nexus, an evolutionary nexus between thinking about action and action. There is a very practical reason I bring this up, and I'm going to stress for 1 or 2 more minutes, that if there were types, then I would say to you, if there were, that yes, the red circuit, within certain parameters, but easily to spot, there are red circuit types. They're everywhere, the majority of humanity. And there are yellow circuit types. Much smaller degree, but they are, speaking horizontally, speaking laterally, they are the absolute avant-garde reflection of life's growth through humanity. That both of those are true. And then there seems to be this huge segment of nervous people, emotional people, talented people, disturbed people, delirious people. They just seem to be everywhere, including our own midst. But compared to the other two, they are not a type. It's a misnomer. It is a misclassification. But it is an evolutionary nexus that must be plugged in, because everyone, to some degree, feels it. That there's obviously an emotional life. I just threw in the arts, but I suspect that most people, at least in the Western world, or most contemporary people in the world, would even throw in the spiritual life, if they were not so fanatic to make it off on a branch of its own, that somewhere beyond just the body, just beyond crude kinds of rituals and dancing to fall and spring, and beyond some kind of intellectualization of these impotent philosophers type sitting around talking about, is there a God, and if so, I wonder what denomination he is. That there in the middle, what you're calling blue circuit, would have to be the spiritual life of man, the feeling, the compassion, the charity. It is an evolutionary nexus that plugs in between action and all aspects, the life of action, the life of that part of life's body which deals, if we could so isolate it, deals only in action, not thinking about action, not feeling about action. It is either acting or it is not acting. That's its only 2 modes. It is an evolutionary nexus between that and the other extreme, which would be thinking of action. That's all. No action within itself, but that is now what is the leading guard of life's evolution. That is, this and this is less and less important. This and this thinks up those machines, draws them out, sends them down to the foundry, down into the mines, and they build something that now can come out and take the place of 400 or 500 of these. Never takes sick leave, never comes in with a headache. But at the other extreme would be absolute thinking of action, no action. So what appears, what may appear very likely to you to be a specific type, that they are certainly blue circuit people, because hell, I'm one of them. Might think ye to yourself. You are a nexus. Do I have to give any course, to some of you I don't, but I was going to ask a rhetorical question. Do I have to at least insinuate any negative inflection into this kind of evolutionary nexus that I feel as though I am just a hot, continual running circuit of unbridled passion, feeling, discouragement, uncontrollable passing moments of being high? If you will try and you realize it on your own, if you will try and remember, without thinking about it, what I said, that it is as though it were a nexus that in the process between aspects of life's body being nothing but acting, nothing but action. By action I mean, well, sans that which seems to be consciousness, that you could find, if you're having any theoretical difficulty with what I'm saying, to go back to the would-be archetypical red circuit man. He does what he does, and you can't ask him why he did it. He either can't answer, won't answer, or you may punch you in the nose for asking. It's none of your damn business. But the thing is, it was action. There is no explanation. There is not even the illusion that this in some way was planned. Yes, I have a certain code, I have a certain philosophy. It is action. It is action without even the appearance of conscious direction. And the other end of it, up into the level of line level consciousness now, would be not action, but thoughts of action. Thinking of how action works, thinking of how action could work more efficiently, thinking of the ways in which action heretofore has proved to be less than profitable today. Between that, you have what life has always thought of as the good old emotional people. And within you, it is that which seems to be the blue circuit. Somewhat in line with that. And if it's not, I'll make it. As long as you continue, as everyone is wired up to do to varying degrees, to apparently fight this internal battle, to engage and to support this apparent internal battle between you and yourself, all energy that comes in, all energy that is available for the years you've got left in this dimension, every molecule of energy will be used and it will be transferred. And that's it. Well, I told you it had nothing to do with I've had several questions in the last few weeks along this particular line. I am in no wise ever going to attempt to give any specific description of this thing I'm calling a new circuit, because to do that you would be into what ordinary people would attempt to do by explaining, what's his name? God, yeah. Or people explaining, yes, life after death will be somewhat like the better parts of Long Island, perhaps Nob Hill. And if you can explain it, if you even attempt to explain it, to begin with you don't understand it, and then whatever you explained, even if it happened to be accidentally right, it wouldn't be right by the time the listener got there. My description is three-dimensionally more correct than anything you have ever heard about heaven, being close to God, being enlightened, being awakened, because it is physically, as you would call it, taking place. The expansion of the brain itself, thusly the expansion of consciousness, the expansion of the channel through which humanity takes in energy, transforms it, and continues to move it on in life's body in an efficient manner, continually expanding. It is a new circuit growing. It always was. It was true 5,000 years ago. Whoever understood this was talking about it. It was a new circuit growing, but it seemed to be, as they called it for years and years, another state of spirituality, another level of consciousness, a rebirth. I am not the person I was, and I know I look like him, but I'm not. Something has happened to me. I underwent a, I don't know, but I am not the same. The new circuit. There's a way in which I would direct your attention to this circuit being able to expand, or look at it, let me change the wording. Is the new circuit being as the expanded flow of enriched blood to the yellow circuit. And by enriched, I am referring to that mysterious MV12. But what would seem to be a new state of consciousness. So we'll be talking about the experiences of you being able to personally see that which is invisible, to see that which does not even exist right now, into some wider range future of humanity, if we're talking about X number of years or decades from this instant. This new circuit is as an expanded flow of enriched blood that is no longer being stopped at line level consciousness now, but it is an expanded flow into the yellow circuit. It is not necessary that it expand into the red circuit, not for humanity as a whole. With you it may be. For you to do this in your lifetime, it may be that you are not yet, in the crudest sense and in the fullest sense, you may still not be in the right relationship with the red circuit. Now, you may be pulling a fast one on moi. You may have gotten to the point now that you moved out from some of the houses where you'd lived with some of the people in the group, and you may have quit running every day. Or maybe you run once a week, just in case I might have some mystical ability to find it out. Maybe that'll fool me. Maybe you do continue to just physically eat food that makes you sick. Or you may continue to just eat to the point that you wake up in the morning and you feel like, not the BF, they always confuse it, the BF Goodrich or BF Goodyear blimp. I think if you eat enough, it's the thing of BF Good God. That's a very obscure joke that only me and another person understand, but any of you who ever overeat enough to feel like it, it's not to feel like the BF Goodrich. Feel like the BF Good God blimp. You can strike that off the tape, unless you can laugh at it later. And it is not the expansion of enriched blood into what would seem to be the middle story, into this evolutionary nexus that seems to be so-called human feeling. In the sense that there are problems with a few people doing this, there are certainly things that must be attended to inside the area referred to as human feeling. But you have surely caught on by now, from my hinting, and if you have made any effort to engage in this dialogue, you can see it for yourself. It is not a matter of saying directly, as life keeps wanting to at the crudest of levels, to tell people, listen, you've really got to work on your feelings, and therefore if you're going to join up here with this church, the first thing you got to do is you got to promise to love everybody. Now you got to promise that because God said that everywhere. All over the world He's told everybody that you got to love everybody. That sounds great, I'll do it. And you know where that goes. You better by now. Life has not, for reasons that some of you may be able to kind of piece together, it has not taken what seems to be the blue circuit, that seems to be the emotional life of man, and made it into as simple a dichotomy as it would appear to be on the other two circuits. That is, you're either healthy or not healthy. You know, you're either taking care of yourself, or that you're smoking 20 packs of cigarettes a day, and you're taking dope, and you're not eating good, or at the other end, all you do is sit around and watch reruns of Let's Make a Deal. and you consider intellectual stimulation reading TV Guide. Now, it seems to be the information that life has put into ordinary people at that level, it seems to be a fairly easy choice that you can define, that you can describe by doing something that is intellectually decent, maybe stimulating, maybe it'll help you along in life, and at the other end, you're either taking care of yourself physically or you're not. But notice in the blue circuit, you know, it's like, especially in more sophisticated man, it's like the blue circuit is still kind of the last area that we have got to deal with, because so many of us, even from good families, had such psychological traumas, the pressures of modern-day capitalistic society. I mean, it's just the kind of thing we're all bruised, and we're trying to do the best we can, and we'll work it out. But there seems to be, life has not put forth any simple binary choice of, all right, you should be doing this or doing that. It's still a matter of great conjecture, conflicting opinions from psychologists. Religions are the only one that's ever apparently dealt in an absolute world. That is, hey, if you're not a Catholic, forget it. And you're done for. You have bought the farm once and for all. If you're not a Muslim, you're an infidel. That's it. There is no middle ground. But in what seems to be people dealing with the emotions outside of some fanatical religious context, it's very vague. There are no absolute binary choices. Back to where the sentence started, if anyone other than me can recall. Thus, it is not as simple as it would seem to tell people, all right, what you've got to do is love everybody. If you would love everybody, listen, you'd have a mystical experience just like that, which I will grant you is not untrue by any means. But everyone, if I still wanted to be somewhat facetious, I would say, all right, everyone, let's quit for the night and come back here tomorrow night, and everyone go out that wants to, and you go out and you just try and love everyone. And by God, I'll agree. I can promise you within 24 hours, before you can get back here, you will have an experience. But of course, that is a captious threat, because regardless of what your voice has told you in the past, or your rabbi, your minister, or your great aunt, it's not possible. Things are not wired up that way. You're not supposed to. It is not a problem that humanity cannot love one another. The problem for people attempting this is to ever get past the point that life still has, or continues to spread that information that this is the way things should be, but they're not yet that way. What you have got to do directly is to take the aspects of so-called human emotion, that which I have identified as running primarily, or being identified primarily with my blue circuit, and take that which is unprofitable and stuff it. And of course, the shock to some people is, at least when they think I said it, is that just about everything you call emotions needs to be stuffed. But you've got to see it for yourself, that even that which I always thought of as being sympathetic to my fellow man, or that I thought of as being love, as it is practiced, as humans are wired up, it is not possible. And hence, or thusly, you end up with people killing one another in the name of religion. Just to pick out the glaring example. All right, connected with this, could anyone see that proper action, that is, acting in your own life, and I don't mean the acting of my pretending to do something, but a life of proper action, of acting when it should be a time for action, is a means for the few people. It is a means to conserve energies. It is a way to conserve in rich blood that attempt to drive the kind of voices that you could identify as being blue circuit based. Did that get too convoluted? Why do you keep asking? Proper action. It's kind of a shame for me to go through that and I turn around and just re-quote myself again. Proper action can be used, to say the very least, as a means of conserving AMV12 of the blood, and me using my two-dimensional description of it flowing in this direction, and it absolutely being depleted when it reaches this line, that it reaches you. Yes, this is me. It's gone. That's the weakest part of the system, is me. Yes, I'm me. I can feel it. Just about all nourishment is around the blood, and what's left, hey, yours truly. Proper action can be used, of course now I'm trying to get you to see it, what I'm talking about, but can be used as a means to conserve enriched blood that can be seen as the normal driving energy for blue circuit voices. I almost did requote myself. I bet you I can make it simple via example. Boy, what I should have done was variations of that, and everyone, but especially those of you that heretofore and hereafter may continue to want to think of yourself as being a blue circuit type. Look at what the voice is. Look at what seems to be your so-called emotional life. How much of it seems to be based upon that great, not American, but earthly tradition of regret. That's what I meant by should have done. The regrets of my life. I should have said so-and-so. I should have punched them in the nose. Or conversely, I should have told my mother I loved her before she died. Proper action can conserve the energy. Did it flow in that simple direction? This is not inaccurate, my drawing, my symbol. But did it flow as simply as from the red, that's where man was plugged into the primal flow, through the blue, gets up here, used up, and the process continues. Did it operate in that simplistic of a fashion? You can conserve what is going up through here that are the voices. Is what I mean by what seems to be the blue voices, that I'm suggesting that you can almost entirely lump into the grand and glorious basket of regret. If nothing else, if you can't stretch it enough, I have to do all the work for you. To read something terrible that happened in the world, and you read it in the paper and you want to cry, you regret that it happened. You may regret, I should have done something. I should have sent money to that charity. Or you regret, I wish I was big and strong and brave in life. I'd get a plane ticket and I'd fly over and I'd find that guy and I'd punch him in the nose. I'd shoot him. A continual feeling of regret. Things are not right. Things are not right with me. They've never been right with me. I can't make them right. No matter what I do is wrong. Nay. Those voices can be drained of their energy through what it just said, which is a lie. I can't do anything right. The blue voices, what have they ever done? Well, they care. Those of you on tape, I keep forgetting this. As far as I was informed, you can't hear what goes on out here, and we never show the crowd here. And so some of this I just became aware enough to verbalize it. You don't understand at times that I was about to, for instance, say I had enough reaction that I wasn't going to say anything else. I was going to leave that sketch where it was. But I will point out to you listening and looking, I keep forgetting that you don't see the crowd out here. We never show them, plus you can't hear it off this one mic. But I am fairly well satisfied with the reaction that just happened for me not to push it any further. So let me give another aspect of it. Could you see, on the other hand, that proper thinking of action, that is proper word food, to refer to myself previously, but the proper thinking of action would be a means by which to conserve enriched blood, that is, to conserve the AMV12 in the blood, and to allow more of it to feed the higher lateral areas of the yellow circuit itself. And that little description, I almost gave it away by throwing in the word food. But since enough of you here, a minute ago when I ended up me speaking of proper action being a means to conserve energy, to drain away the energy that normally motivates and fuels the blue circuit voices, to get up into the yellow area where we're talking about an area of thinking of action, not of crying of action, not of regret over lack of action, but in the proper area of thinking of action. The proper thinking of action will allow more of the enriched blood to go further up. We're not talking about even a new circuit right now, but we'll just go further up to expand what you seem to be now, what you seem to be able to think. I'm going to get to the dirty part. I'm going to repeat one more time. Those of you that are really the foundations of this fake organization don't require this anymore. But you people who still seem to be somewhat befuddled, confused, I'm about to give you as strange a one, perhaps, from one viewpoint that you've ever heard, and it is literally true. And if I don't weaken, if I don't have pity, or unless I'm shown that nobody hears any of this, I'm going to turn it into some kind of task. I'll make up something before I get to the end of this. This is not some kind of weird, strange, little something that I happen to observe and just going to point out to you to pass the time away. I'm going to make it as a question, since I have such astounding luck with that kind of intro into different areas. But I always thought it sort of gave it a homey touch. Being the homey kind of cat I am. I'm going to ask it as a question. The answer is no, because none of you have done it. But there's enough people now that I believe I'm going to be able to drag you up to it within several minutes, that you'll hear what I'm saying. So here goes the question. And the answer from all of you initially is no. But listen. Have any of you ever noticed, put it simply, that there seems to be an area, a problem, a thing about which you're thinking, and you physically change your position, and what you think about it inalterably is shifted? The answer is no, but it's true that none of you have ever thought that. Well, now let's go on to this. Another question. What if I told you that I could prove to you that events have no time, that they do not exist in any sense of time, and it's only human perception that puts them there? What if I could absolutely prove that? What effect would that have, if any, on you? What effect, if any, would that have on all of humanity if I could prove it? That everything that seems to be an event, I mean the ordinary sense, that just whatever happens, an event, has no time. Now, of course, through ordinary perception, that's not true. That whatever happens, me making my gesture, me walking from there over here and sit down, that was an event of whatever magnitude. And it happened in time. It happened in the last 20 seconds. Or if you'd been looking at your watch, you could look at it now. And the event was I stood up, and I was talking, and I sit back down, and the event happened between 10:14, 0.20 seconds, and 10:14 and 24 seconds. That the event, that all events happen in time, but what if I could absolutely prove? I could prove to you, I could make you see it. Through example, through mathematics, but if I could prove, and just no doubt, that events did not actually have a time, that it's only the perception of them puts them in time, what effect might that have? Well, having no connection with it, let's jump to my single frame snare, if you recall. I point out the way in which, from one viewpoint, that human consciousness at the ordinary level can be seen by me doing my old snapping of the fingers of the blood flowing through the system in my two-dimensional manner, from the base of the spine up to the yellow circuit. And I point out that you can see, I've given you enough task, all these little things of walking and trying to turn your attention on yourself, that most of you should have had some good glimpse of the fact that the way consciousness ordinarily works, just the way, as your mind would want to call it, itself, that the way you think runs in little pieces, as though it were a film that's been running through there, but what seems to be events, what seems to be something of which I am ordinarily conscious, can also be seen to be my single frame snare. That is, taking now as being forever, taking that as being the once and for all statement of what's going on, taking the way in which I feel right this second as being the way I've always felt, and by God, I'll always feel that way, being my opinion about something. What do you think of so-and-so? You heard his new album? Listen, he hadn't done anything good since '73 on that Going Back to Alabama album. Forget it. It doesn't matter that 2 weeks later on the radio you go, hey, what's that record? And it's him, the guy you just dismissed. You should know by now it's not the folly of some individual, it's not a weakness, it's not a mistake that the God's made with humanity. It is a beautiful process, frighteningly beautiful. When you just first start getting close to it, frighteningly beautiful. But it is as though you had taken this continual movie. Now, all of you know how a movie film looks. It's just a bunch of little individual frames. And it moves in a certain way, light shows through it, and it gives the illusion of moving pictures. Consciousness takes these things that seems to be an event. The time my mother said, I wish you had never been born. The time my first wife says, I'm running off with a mechanic down at the Amoco station. The first time I felt the urge to dress up like a ballerina and hang around the Ford plant. It's some event, and it happened in time, and it's some absolute reflection of the way that I feel, the way that I think, perhaps the way that I am. It is literally a single frame snare that this one view, this one event that I perceive, the event could have happened 30 years ago, which of course is proof absolutely for traumas, psychological problems. You know, forget what I told you, it's just absolute proof. I still remember this, and it affects me. I still suffer over it. My mother didn't have to tell me that. She didn't have to tell me that. It's already off. Hold up fingers. How much time? Now we're going to cut the tape. Don't go away. Oh, all right. This single frame snare, you could also see as being the epitome of times this appraisal that if time did exist, time could be seen from a certain view of attempting to do this. Time could be seen, forget ideas of horned beast with, is it hoven feet? Cleaved feet? Evil spirits? Anti-gods? That if you wanted to look at it in that way, you could see time as being the epitome of that, that it is that which would withhold, that which would cloud, that which would cover up, that which would distort some piece of information that's available. And the single frame snare would be it. Or if you forgot where I started this ordinary acceptance that everything that happens, events, they happen in some kind of sequence. They happen, there's a time to it. That this thing happened, and it happened in a time. I remember where I was. I remember what I was feeling about the person just before they did that to me. And now I remember how I feel about it. If whatever happened, it happened at some particular time. But what if I could prove to you that events have no time, that they did not happen in some time? What possible effect would that have? And me stating now that it could be seen as being exemplary. Or for those of you in Alabama, the epitome of time's disappraisal. Then what would you have been freed from? That nothing happened at any particular time. How would you remember it? How would you regret it? How could the blue circuit perceive of it? How would you know it happened to you? How would you know it was done to you? Conversely, how would you know that, God, I regret that I did that to her? That they did not happen in some time. What possible effect would that have? And me stating now that it could be seen as being exemplary. Or for those of you in Alabama, the epitome of time's disappraisal. Then what would you have been freed from? That nothing happened at any particular time. How would you remember it? How would you regret it? How could the blue circuit perceive of it? How would you know it happened to you? How would you know it was done to you? Conversely, how would you know that, God, I regret that I did that to her? How about one more question? Mine just two. I'll give you a part of a question and then I'll give you an answer. An answer. A answer. Has anyone noticed how life has arranged itself so that those who are wired up to play out a kind of pacifist, and I don't mean that just in relationship to anti-war movements, but pacifist in the sense that throughout history there are groups of people and individuals proclaiming their non-involvement in confrontational change. That's not the way they'd necessarily describe it, but their non-involvement in confrontation, in disputes, all kinds of conflict. But I was just deepening it beyond how life allows them to describe it. It would be a kind of attempted disinvolvement with all confrontational change. For those of you making notes, you might later consider what other kind of change is there, but I'll leave that to the winds of fate. That was the question part. Now I gave you a piece of an answer. You should be able to see it if you give it some consideration, and you can expand. I'm not going to do it much more myself, but expand what I mean by pacifist. Throughout history, they're going right now, and all of you, there's some little piece of it. That there are areas in which, and the voices may have very good reason, it's against my religion. I am too intelligent. I don't approve of that in some kind of humanistic theory. I am a pacifist. I will not get involved with that kind of confrontation. So all of you should have some piece of it somewhere. You should be able to see it. And then you should be able to see what I'm saying, that life has wired up certain kinds of people to be that. But then notice, it is those who are wired up as weak and frightened to start with, or that area within you. And now the answer, a answer I was going to give you, a suggestion is, what life ultimately needs in a continuing cycle is to have hot, charged, kinetic people become so. That is, not the frightened, not the weak. But who has ever confronted, who has ever seen, who would like to confront a charged up, hot-wired, kinetic pacifist? And yet, as in many other areas I could mention, the cycle runs, and that's what life finally needs. But it will start out using people who are mechanically wired up. And just one example I'm using, that they are weak and frightened. It's not the judgment. They're wired up to be that way. They're parts of life's body that's weak and frightened. They're parts of your body, your entire being, that are weak and frightened. And they're the ones that become the pacifists. They're wired up to be that. But for that, assuming, whatever it is I mean behind the whole word pacifist, that is increasingly a necessity in life's body, that is producing a growth, an expansion, then it reaches a certain point, and you cannot have people who are wired up to do this mechanically to do it, because they can't do it to start with. They're doing what they must do. They and the apparent event are one. It has to then have a non-pacifist become a pacifist. Then you have changed the whole level of the game. But I point this out for specific reasons having nothing to do, of course, with war efforts or pacifists, as they are called on the news. I'm going back, at least you think I've forgotten it, to different positions and a shift in apparent yellow circuit patterns. This is so tricky that I guess I'll just give you a very crude apparent description of how the task might work, and you're going to have to take it from there, because I'm not going to soil this one much more. It is connected with a number of things that a number of you could piece together with something that you currently are on to. Listen. Just listen, and if you don't feel it in you, find it in you tomorrow. You could be laying in bed. I'll use this example. You don't really have to get up yet, but you woke up. Nothing astounding going on. No hangover, no stomach ache from too much food. You're not too hot, you're not too cold. And let us say that you apparently had been dreaming about something that had some literal significance in your life. Perhaps you were dreaming about a problem you had at work. Perhaps last night you had been sitting around trying to come up with a new formula, a new plan to do something. Perhaps you've been trying to write a story. Perhaps you were trying to write a piece of music. Perhaps you were worried about something that your mother told you your sister was doing. Something that seemed to be a real occurrence, a real event, a real situation. Not this strange, surrealistic daydreaming that we have at night. And you wake up, let's say that you're in the normal position where you wake up, maybe on your stomach with a pillow crunched up, and you kind of in this position, and you realize you got some more time, and you apparently are actually thinking about this situation, giving it some thought. And then the whole circuitry wants to move, and you turn over and you lay on your back and you pull the sheets down and you lay on your back. As far as words will go, and there's the absolute reality to this, the way in which you were thinking about that thing changes when you turn over this way. And you have never noticed it. But you do such as this in practice. Now, I'm just putting words on this because it does not work in this 2 or even 3-dimensional manner. But it's as though you don't like what you're thinking and you're trying to regain the way in which you were thinking. Not just the words, but apparently a feeling about what you were thinking. And you'll roll back over on your stomach. And you can get back close to what you were. And then it's as though, I'm describing this as though someone knew what they were doing, that people had free will and understood what they were doing. So don't get trapped. All of you know that by now. Then maybe you roll back on your back and you're still thinking the words about your sister, or whatever the situation, about the job, the problem, but the whole way in which you were feeling and thinking when you're over on your stomach is gone. And so instead of just flopping back like you were, if you would have noticed, you may turn over and get on your side, which should be at least one other position that some of you use, whether you sleep in or not. You just kind of roll on your side with your legs together like a Buddha statue, and you get your arm over this way or step between your legs. And the way that you think and the way that you're feeling about it has changed again. These are absolute facts that all you got to do is observe, and no one has ever noted it. There's been no reason. There has been a kind of non-awareness of this. I'm sitting here deciding whether to give you an example or not to get you started. All right. How about this? People are talking, say, I hear that they want you to speak at the PTA meeting this week about whether we should engage any more in any sort of censorship or of the books our children are reading, having kind of editorial control of what goes on in the library. I heard they wanted you to say something. Another person says, yes, they did, and I have real strong feelings about that. And I sit here and talk to you, and I can explain it in a sensible way, but if they're going to ask me to get up on my feet and say that, I know what will happen. All right, at first you might say, wait a minute, that's the pressure of getting up in front of the crowd. I'm not saying that that is not connected with it. But note, and some of you probably said this, all right, I can sit here and talk to you, that's one thing, but they want me to get on my feet and stand up there and talk to 100 people, I can't do it. I won't be able to talk, I'll be tongue-tied, I'll be too frightened, or I've tried it before. And I stand up and I begin to speak to a crowd and it won't come out right. Well, it's obviously the pressure of the crowd, right? You want any more examples? How many of you ever do business on the phone? I don't mean have a job as being secretary and sit there all the time, although I could make up that example. Perhaps you sit at your desk. Perhaps you are a receptionist. You answer the phone. And it seems to go in a certain manner. And you always, that's the rule, you're sitting there. And somebody asked for something, you got up and did it, and the phone rang, and you reached over to get it. And if you'd really observe, you may try your best to get back and sit down. Perhaps it's ringing, the boss is standing there and looks at you, and you got to answer it, and you pick it up. And if you could feel, it's not exactly the same. You're just 2 feet away from your chair. And it's not the same. Hello? And somebody asks the kind of things they normally do. I want the complaint department. And you just do it every day, you know how to handle it. And if you could feel it, if you'd have a reason to be aware of it, something's different. And you might even say, just a minute. And you get around, and you sit back down, and you get there, and you go, yeah, what is it? Let me take it back and assure you that there is something of very prime significance, not necessarily to all of you right now, but this is the sort of thing that is way off in the edge between the gap between all of this and what another circuit is. The posture, the movement of this entire organism But taken at the lowest possible descriptive level, what seems to be physical posture absolutely affects the circulation of the blood, and it absolutely affects what ordinarily is referred to as thought patterns. That there's certain ways I can think about a certain problem, but I can only do it in the way that seems satisfying to me if I lean over like this, and I can get in a kind of position like this. But then I happen to note I can apparently be talking about the same subject. And for whatever reason, I straighten up, and it's not the same. I have to go back to, now I feel like, well, I'm getting into it. Now I know where I found my place. This is what I like to think. This is how I like to feel about this, and I can do it. But you know, I cannot talk about this matter in this kind of position. Do not discount this as it could be done or attempted to explain on the basis of habit. It could be. If I was a psychologist, I certainly could. I could about the person in the phone. It literally, you know this, the position, the movement of the body literally affects, well, I assume you do, in very small ways perhaps, the circulation of the blood. And it directly, without you having to know anything about biology or physiology, you just observe what I told you about bed, what I told you about that you like to sit down if you're going to start thinking great thoughts. Or if you're going to sit down, you're going to read a book on philosophy. Perhaps once a week you pick up one, or a scientific magazine that you get at a certain place, and you always prop your feet up to read that. Maybe not constantly, but you might let your feet down, but you get to a good part, and you have noticed, you put your feet back up to get, all right, I'm in the mood, I'm going to take this in. You know, when it gets the good stuff, wait a minute, I want a pencil, I'm about to have a great thought. Is you'll get back in that position. That the flow of energy through you, what you're taking in, what you're transferring, is absolutely affected directly by what would just commonly be referred to as physical posture. And I assume that you know that this has much more to do than my little joke that I make periodically, that the most important thing about attempting to be mystical is posture. Posture is very important. I've told you that over and over. I am not speaking of anything so obvious as that. I'm about to stop but some of you, the few of you, among the few of you, should be able to almost jump in a brand new black void with this, because you never notice it, and it is an absolute scientific, physical fact. And you're doing it constantly. Just slightly. But the obvious ones that you never notice are right there before you. You don't have to start out looking for some kind of slight thing. Is maybe I stand a little bit like this when I'm talking to a brand new woman that I think may go for me. But I notice if I feel like she won't, it seems like I notice that my hips will kind of slide in the other direction. I'm not talking about even something that subtle. I'm talking about the absolute obvious. That you sit down to think about something. That someone calls you, a member of your family, somebody in your business, and they give you a kind of problem, the kind of thing that's not all that unusual that you got to think about. I'm just using the simple terms now. You got to think about it. You hang up the phone, and you're feeling. Your whole organism wired up that I'm just putting words on this made-up example. All right, this is serious. I got to think about it now. You'll get in a certain position. I mean, you may go through another routine. You may go fix a cup of coffee. You may want to get your cigarettes. You may want to get the fan turned on, the air conditioning just right. But then you will physically get in a certain position. It's like, all right, now. But what you do is get in the position to think the same damn thing you wired up to think. And if you get in another one, you can't think that way. And you don't like it. And we talk about the ordinary level, and you'll get back in that one. You'll roll back from your back on your stomach to think about it. That I don't know, I just can't think about this. All right, now, all right. And you think whatever you're wired up to think. You will feel about what you're apparently thinking the way you're wired up to feel. Nobody sees any possible use of this. Beyond the use of it, some of you should find it frighteningly beautiful. Now, I've already described it to you, and a lot of you think you've heard it. But go try it. Just observe it. When I say try it, you know, there's no experiment. Just observe that this is what happens. All I got to do is change it. When certain people call me bill collectors on the phone, I always stand up. Hey, quit calling me like this. Same. Try to sit down or say, wait just a minute, and take off your clothes right quick and lay on your back on the floor and say, all right, what is it? Or there's some man or woman you're trying to seduce, and you call them, you're always asking for a date. Notice, you always get in the same kind of position. And they keep saying no, stand on your head, put on a funny hat, put flowers between your toes, anything, and then call them up. Ah, yeah, that's silly. It changes the pressure. I'm not going into any medical description because my description is named based upon medical reality. But it is changing the flow. It's changing the kind of pressure at very subtle levels of the blood. That's one way to describe it. But the other is the obvious one that you can observe, that my physical posture absolutely immediately affects what seems to be my thought patterns, and that you seek out without knowing it. All right, I'm going to talk about a certain matter, and I know how I feel about it. I'm putting words and reality into people, ordinary people's minds, hearts, and red circuit that does not occur, of course. But it's as though, all right, I know what this problem is, and I already know how I'm going to think about it and how I'm going to feel about it, because everybody does know what they're going to do and say next. So you people never figured that out. Everybody knows. So you get in the position. So you get in the position, and sure enough, yeah. But you find out the chair where you normally sit, your girlfriend threw it out, but it's in a different room and you can't find it. You know, I got to think about this. I'll tell you one more time. In bed is a prime, probably to many of you, an easy example to lay there and toss and turn and think about something and to see. And it is glaring when you see it. It's the same words. You're apparently thinking about the same problem. You're in one position, and you just roll over on your back to get a little cooler and pull the sheets down and kind of loosen up, and you're thinking about the same problem or the same thing, the same people, the same words, and it's not the same. And you have to turn back over, and then it's the same. And you thought all this was simple. Well, from here over, you people did, and from here over, all of you thought was complex. Surprising how everyone can be wrong. The task was, I think I'll leave it as elusive as I intended to what I've just described, is to go do this. It's to willfully observe it for yourself. And I will suggest to those of you that sounds right is try it in the bed. Be able to lay there. The weekend's coming up. Like everything else of this ilk, there's nothing to really do, there's nothing to really try to experiment with. It's to become aware of the fact, here I am, I woke up, this is my normal position, and I'm thinking about so-and-so, I'm thinking about, you know, today should I go do so-and-so? Or how am I going to arrange to do so-and-so, which I had decided I need to do? Then turn over, and apparently you're still thinking about the same question, and it is no longer the same. It's just glaring once you see it. And then it's doubly glaring, all right, there is some way, no matter what the words are saying, like, well, I want to do so-and-so, but it's not right. And you turn back where you were to where the words are still, I want to do so-and-so, but there's a feeling like, I ain't going to do that. Them voices can talk about it all day, and I may worry about it. I may regret this afternoon not having done it. And then roll over in the third position, and you can think the same words, and it's like it's almost in a foreign language. I don't even feel yay or nay. This just ain't right, and you've got to go back to one of the two. Consider that the task.